Well, thank you for staying with me. It's the last Friday of the year, and yes, I'm going to deliver my blunt thoughts. But this time, it's going to be just a reflection on what the year has brought, and which is why I have titled today's installment, Total Recall 2023 in Retrospect. Total Recall 2023 in Retrospect. I'm just going to walk us through some of the topical issues we dealt with on a monthly basis every year, from January till now. And I'll be going very quickly because there are a number of slides. So just stay with me, Ghana, for let's just recollect some of what we discussed in this year. So let's start with January 2023. We had to talk about the COVID-19 vaccine procurement. You still remember it was a big issue. And the amount paid to different entities, UNICEF or Avast, $120+ million. The amount utilized by UNICEF or Avast, 38.32. Outstanding amounts that had to be paid, 81.87, or that had to be used. Next slide. Then in terms of amounts mobilized in 2020, according to the Finance Ministry versus the Auditor General, the Finance Ministry claimed that what we had secured on the back of COVID-19 was 18.19 billion cedis, and according to the Auditor General, 19.11 billion Ghana cedis. It created some disparities, but nothing really came of those disparities. There were explanations. Whether they amounted to much, we don't know. Next slide. Then we also took a look at the Special Audit Report on COVID-19 expenditure. Again, Finance Ministry versus the Auditor General. You would notice here that Korea, Germany, the government of Ghana, some of what had been given were not added here as far as the Finance Ministry was concerned, which was a bit of a no-brainer or something to scratch your head about. But the Auditor General had these even without those ones. Let's go to the next slide. And then the utilization of the funding. We were told about supply of food items, free water and electricity, evacuation of Ghanaians, support for small and medium-scale enterprises, purchase of medical supplies, cost of mandatory quarantine, allowances to frontline health workers. You remember this became problematic, this bit. Allowances that were supposedly given to them. But all of these were what were cited, but is this what all of it went into? When you talk about COVID-19, I remember the former Minister for Sanitation and Water Resources coming to Parliament to defend the $40+ million she had been given. I wasn't convinced, but I guess Parliament was. Next slide. Then there was also the utilization of Bank of Ghana COVID-19 bonds. The receipts were expended on liability management, statutory payments to SNIT and the GET Fund, budgetary support. Those were the claims that were made. Next slide. And it goes on and on to the utilization of the IMF's rapid credit facility as well. Let's go to the next slide. All of this feeds into that discussion, and supposedly those amounts of money were expended on, like I said, medical equipment, medicine, life insurance, among others. Next slide. I told you I'd be going very quickly because it's all 12 months and a few that we've picked. So let's hit February 2023. Some of the topical matters. The DDEP, exempt pensioners from the DDEP. You remember this one. So your continuous picketing over DDEP unnecessary. That was what the finance minister was telling them, that you're coming here to picket. It's unnecessary. But they found it necessary. Eventually, they got what they wanted. Really, there is no reason for us to be sitting here because that assurance has been given on paper, but it didn't take being given on paper to materialize. Next slide. Gabby Otridako posted, for a former CJ to take up a noble cause such as she did, but at such late hour when all was done, and for all that publicity, she owed it to herself and her social standing to have understood the issues far better than what she exhibited last Friday. She is bigger than that. It was a bit of a jab at her. Then what was the response? And this is actually not this picture here, but let's go ahead with it. Sophia Akufu said, Insults are the weapon of the pin-brained. I'm not going to trade words with pin-brains. I'm sorry, Gabby Otridako can call me paranoid. I don't care. We're talking about people. We're talking about human beings. We're talking about people who have served this country and have served well and served hard. Not easy service. The picture, our apologies for that. And then the DDEP, Final results we had in billions of cedis. Initial target 137, first revision 132, second revision 130. What we arrived at, the third revision 97.7 billion. Next slide. And then we were also told about the Finance Ministry's explanation. The outstanding principal and amounts presented in the press release differed from the outstanding principal announcements, and it went on and on. I don't want to bore you too much. We've already been through that. Let's go to the next slide. We all know how that affected, everything else. In March, the third month of the year, we were looking at a pregnant woman filling potholes on the Obuasi Road. We've been talking about roads ad infinitum, ad nauseum. And you can see the pictures there. Unemployment mixed with poor roads, a deadly cocktail. Next slide. Then we looked at some staff at the Controller and Accountant General's Department, wahala never they finished for this country, who had rejected allocation of saloon cars to the department because they felt, why were they getting this when other departments, agencies and stuff were getting that? The question is, do you need this before you can work? But that was what they put forward. They argued that counterparts at the Ministry of Finance were driving four-wheel drive vehicles while their bosses were being compelled to drive Toyota Camrys, a saloon car. It tells you where our thinking has gone as a country. Next slide. Then we could also look at the Professor Frimpong Boateng report. Let me tell you that I did not take one excavator for anything. They know the truth. Now things are coming up. We know those who are behind it. And the party people who are there, people in government, including Jubilee House, who are doing galamsey and so on, even now. That was Professor Frimpong Boateng. And we all know what trickled over from that report. And eventually, when you come through, you would hear of how it was said that this report by the AG, that this report lacked no merits, that it had nothing in there. Let's go to the next slide. Then we head to April 2023. UK red lists Ghanaian health workers, and the UK put Ghana and 53 others on red list for health workers recruitment. Why? It was clear that while they were taking, everything here was going into well, what would I say? The quagmire, into the doldrums. We're still bleeding even as we speak. And that's the situation. That's the tale of the tape. Anesthetists, I think over 40% of them have left the country. Nurses leaving in droves, teachers as well. Let's go to the next slide. Then, so the migration of health workers. The countries listed had a universal health coverage index that was lower than 50, based on which these decisions were taken. In Ghana, so the density of doctors, nurses, and midwives were below the global median of 48.6 per 10,000 population, meaning one health worker in Ghana was taking care of 206 people. It goes on and on. But let's go to the next slide. So this is just a rehash. And in terms of exporting nurses, these are some of the places and what they had done. Germany, 3,000 Ghanaians going there. We didn't have statistics, but we knew that in other countries they were going as well. Next slide. Let's head into May. We're approaching the 6-month point. 5th month now, then we'll get there. We also had education. This incident really broke my heart. The drowning of school pupils. And it happened about twice or thrice within the year. So we're looking at May the 10th, 2023, the Fana Botiano area. Pupils involved 12, number of deaths 9. And January 24, 2023, Wayokope. And then you saw that pupils involved 20 and 8. So January and then May as well. Next slide. And it tells you more about what had happened there. Next slide. Again, so you see the scenes and what a disaster this was. It hits home personally. Let's go to the next slide. Now, midway through the year. Tar and the missing oil. And now we are talking about SML and everything in between. Well, the amount missing, over 105,000 liters. Aviation turbine kerosene, 252,000 liters. Electrical cables, 18 drums. Some of you have forgotten about this. Yes, we did this. And we can go to the next slide. And you look at Torenco. You remember we were talking about them at a point in time. Lease period, 6 years, barrels to refine per year, 8 million. Annual rent, $1 million. But, next slide. But in terms of power cut intentions, okay, so tied to that conversation. Some of them may not necessarily because we put all of them together. But in terms of an imminent shutdown of power, you remember the IPPs and their standoff with government. In fact, it is still ongoing on some level. Power cut intention, July the 1st. This was when they were giving us deadlines. June the 20th, emergency meeting, interim payment, 30% of outstanding arrears. And even this, there was a problem here. And government debt owed 1.4 billion. But this is not necessarily what the figure is currently. Let's move on. Then going back to the nurses leaving in droves, we went back to this issue in that month. And this Giftiayi, Greater Accra Regional Hospital, she's there. She said, my intensive care unit alone lost 20 nurses to the UK and US in the last 6 months with grave implications. Care is affected as we are not able to take any more patients. There are delays and it costs more in mortality. Patients die. Yeah. Next slide. And it tells you more about why this was happening and the statistics. Let's go to the next slide. So now we hit July. We're gradually getting to the end of the year. The Accra Sky Train project, I remember saying at that time, they're all from crying. Even the one on the floor, we know the seat up. But anyway, $2 million paid to Africa Investor Holdings Limited. Next slide. And then the minority in parliament called for prosecution of the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund Board and management. Payment was made without feasibility studies and on and on. The Auditor General's 2021 report raised concerns about the payment. Next slide. And then we also had the entire tussle with Standard & Poor's, Fitch, and all those other global rating agencies, for which reason we said we're going to create our own African ratings agencies. But we subscribed to them. They did not compel us. That's just to situate the conversation. Ken Ofori-Atta said it was time for Africa to have its own credit rating agency. However, major challenges such as systemic bias and limited data were still a hindrance. The president difficulties in the economy were exacerbated by the reckless behavior of ratings agencies that engaged in downgrades, shutting Ghana out of the capital market and turning the liquidity crises into solvency crises. Next slide. August 2023. Some of what we discussed, Cecilia Dapa saga, cash stolen. Well, when One Love the Kubala was in here with me a short while ago, he was talking about money in certain people's houses and sanitation and everything. But these were the sums of cash. I will not bore you with it. We spoke about a total $1.4 million. Of course, if you do the dynamics, it may be slightly less. But in terms of property, cash stolen and everything, that matter is still being pursued in court. Next slide. And then there was the Bank of Ghana's gargantuan losses on the back of the DDEP. Yes, 60.8 billion. It has also impacted its ability to play certain roles as far as the banking sector is concerned. Next slide. Then we hit September. We're gradually getting into December. September, Eva Menz on revenue collection. She went to, I think it was the Stanbic Graphic breakfast meeting and said a few things that many people who watch the economic space were like, yo, wagwan, what are you saying? So we do not collect enough revenue compared to our peers. There is a disconnect between GDP and what comes to the state. Half of revenue generated goes to pay salaries. Ghanaians should pay their taxes so the society can develop. I do agree, the tax net is pretty small, but you don't overburden those who are already paying. And the VIT and everything else that is coming up, I don't know how she feels about it, but anyway, those were her comments. Next slide. Then, the president on economic crisis is difficult. I'm the first to admit it. I've said it several times, but at the end of the day, I believe when the moment comes, Ghanaians will reflect on who best can get us out of this difficulty. At this point, people were asking, has the president given up? So who is that next person who will get us out? I don't know, maybe you have the answer. And then there was Occupy Julobi House. That was the name they gave it, okay? And everything happening and the demonstrators being prevented. Next slide. And then finally being allowed to demonstrate. Next slide. Next slide. October 2023. Then there was also this. We found it pretty interesting. Reactions to protests. So Occupy Julobi House. This is how some Ghanaians were treated. Yet in the States, Joe Biden joined a protest in the USA, saying that those, I think it was truck drivers also, they actually deserved the raise. That was Joe Biden becoming first sitting US president to join the picket line. He, the president, went and joined picketers. In this country, you don't even get to present a petition sometimes. Next slide. And then Governor Addison and the Occupy Bank of Ghana saga, the demonstration. Next slide. And his refusal to receive the petition. But I also said that, Charlie, you're coming to give me a petition that I should go and you want me to come and receive it. He'll be some way. Then, time to wake up. I shared my thoughts on this. Ecuador, among other countries, many of them in South America, there was swollen shoot among other diseases back in South America a long time ago. Their cocoa production dwindled. That was how Ghana and the rest came up. Now, they are doing this on large swathes of land, and we are suffering here. Some are even smuggling it out. Question is, if we are not careful, what will happen to Ghana? Will we lose our place? November and December, and then we are gone. November, there was the bit about the American ambassador to Ghana talking about forex inflows and how they would be tied to this LGBTQ bill if we passed it into law. And then finally, December. What do we have for December? The 3 billion Ghana cedi lie, SML, and everything in between. That is what is the tail of the tape. That is what runs through. So these are some of the topical matters we've discussed this year on your favorite Blunt Thoughts. Just to give you a bit of retrospection on where we've been and where we still are. I'll leave it to you to read between the lines. Have we made any progress, especially in our fight against corruption, schools under trees, and everything in between? Ghana schools of shame. Are we getting better leadership? What more would we like to see next year? I want that to percolate in your mind ahead of 2024. And that is why I put this together with my team. I'd also like to salute Kofi Ajay, Tony, and Caleb, all those who helped put this together, Mac Daniel as well. These are my blunt thoughts on the last Friday of the year, shared with you as always, passionately. Thank you for watching.